What's up YouTube? Robbie Vapes back again, and today we are checking out a tank that claims to be able to hit up to 200 watts. That's right guys, I'm talking about the Zpal Coral Tank. Will it achieve the 200 watt mark? Stay tuned. That's right, today we're checking out a brand new sub-ohm tank. This is the Zpal Coral Tank. Some of you may have heard of this, maybe you haven't. What we're going to be doing today is doing a full review on it, going over the tests on how high it will actually hit. Will it reach that 200 watt mark? To test that, of course, I will be using the DNA 200 by Vapor. This is the device to test on because it's going to hit a true 200 watts when we get up there. Now, of course, before we get into that, some other things we'll be talking about in this review is the tank overall, how it works, the top fill, the overall aspects of it, some pros and cons, and things like that. Now, before we get into the down and dirty section, we're going to actually do the testing first, and then what I'm going to do in the down and dirty section is use that coil that I just used to go up to 200 watts, take it apart and see what the cotton looks like inside. Now this coil is about 2 days old, so it's pretty new, and it should be nice and broken in by now. It should be at that optimal range where if it's going to hit 200 watts, now would be the time. So with that being said guys, let's start the testing. We'll start it low at about 100 watts, then we will work our way up from there, hopefully getting to that 200 watt mark, and again, seeing how high we can push the limits on this tank. So with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so here we are at 100 watts. As you can see, I'll turn that on real quick so you guys can get a close-up of that. 100 watts on the Vapor DNA 200. So this will hit true 100 watts and up and above that as well as we work our way up. Basically what we're going to be doing as we go along, there is 2 airflow controls on this device. One is the airflow control ring located at the bottom of the device, most like any other sub-tanks you see. The second one is actually in the drip tip itself. Now they do recommend when you're exceeding 120 watts to start opening up that airflow on the drip tip. It will help cool it down and become a little bit more manageable for you. So because of that, we will be following those instructions as we work our way up. Let's see if it makes a difference, and let's start at 100 watts. So 100 watts, here we go. Nice, dense, flavorful clouds. There you go, 100 watts. We knew it was going to work. Let's go on to 110. Alright guys, here we go, 110 watts. Hopefully you guys can see that if it zooms in a little bit and focuses. 110 watts, there we go. Let's take a hit and see what vapes. No dry hit, no burn taste. Let's crank up to 120 and see how she hits. There you go guys, 120 watts on the Vapor DNA 200. Let's hit it, see what we get, and I'll let you know. Perfect. No flavor loss, no burnt hit, no dry hit. Excellent. Let's move it up to 130 and start cranking up that airflow on the drip tip to see how it goes from there. There you go guys, 130 watts. We have the airflow open just a touch on the drip tip. Let's see what makes a difference, and let's take a hit. Nice big clouds, a little bit wispy because of that airflow on the drip tip, but apart from that, the flavor is still pretty good and no burnt hit, no dry hit. Let's crank it up to 140 and see what it looks like. Alright guys, hopefully you can see that. That's 140 watts on the Zpal Coral Tank. We have the airflow open about halfway on the drip tip. We'll probably open up all the way for 150 plus just to cool it down a little bit for us. But let's see how it vapes at 140 watts. Oh, plenty of vapor, plenty of flavor. Now again, no dry hits, no burning taste, nothing like that. What we're going to do next, crank up to 150 watts, open up that airflow wide open on the drip tip, and we'll take a hit from there. 150 watts, airflow on the drip tip is wide open, so you can see that. We're going to take a hit, see how it vapes, and I'll let you know what I find out. Perfect. Again, no dry hit, no burnt taste, nothing like that. It's hitting nice. What do you see we crank up to 160 watts and see how it vapes? There you go, 160 watts on the DNA 200. We're going to hit this, find out what we get, and see if we get any burning taste or anything like that. So without further ado, airflow is wide open of course as well, and let's take a hit. Ooh, nice, flavorful cloud again, not super dense because of that airflow being up on the top of the drip tip. And what we'll do is if we get to 200 watts so it burnt or a dry hit, I'll actually close off that airflow on the drip tip for you guys just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like with a closed off drip tip at 200 watts. I don't know if it's going to hit very well, but we'll find out. In the meantime, let's go up to 170 watts and see what it looks like. There you go, 175 watts. Hopefully you guys can see that. 175, instead to skip 170, let's go straight to 175. I'm feeling confident about this device, so let's hit it at 175. Airflow, of course, wide open on both the drip tip and the airflow control ring. Let's see how it vapes. Nice, not too bad. It's hitting nicely, no burnt, no dry hit, nothing like that. It is hitting for sure. A lot shorter pulls though, because you're getting so much airflow from that drip tip. It is closing off as much as you can pull out, so you're limited to what you can get from the airflow coming in from both the airflow control ring and from the airflow drip tip. And let's see how it looks at 190 watts. 190 watts, there it is guys. 190, airflow of course wide open. Let's test it out and see what it hits like. A little bit of a burning hit at the end. The initial hit wasn't too bad, but at the very end of it, I definitely got a little bit of burning out of it. I can see it starting to get that burning taste to the back end of it. It's not super bad, but I probably wouldn't recommend vaping it at 190 watts. What we're going to do next is put it up to 200 watts. What'll let you know is if that burning stays there or if it actually expands and becomes more of the hit than just the last bit. But so far we're taking up to 180 watts, no problems. At 190, it did start to have a slight burning taste at the very end, and I imagine we'll see that in the cotton once we dissect this coil. But let's crank it up to 200 watts anyways, see what it looks like, and let's try it out. There you go guys, 200 watts, there it is, 200 watts. Let's take a hit, see how it works out, and after that we'll get down and dirty with this thing and check it out. 200 watts, here we go. Definitely a burning taste for pretty much most of that hit. I do not recommend doing this at 200 watts. I would suggest closer to the 180 mark, 170 mark if you really want to push the limits. My personal preference in this device is right around 130 watts. That's the perfect hit for me personally. If you want to take it higher, you definitely can. But again, at 200 watts, that was pretty burnt. And I imagine we will see that in the cotton when we do the dissection of it. That being said, guys, you know what time it is. It's time to get down and dirty with the Zpal Coral Tank. Alright, we are down and dirty with the Zpal Coral Tank. First things first, let's examine the coil and the cotton and see what it looks like. Alright, let's take a look at the coil before we dismantle it. First thing you're going to notice is these juice holes. There are 4 sets of 8, and they're 2 by 4. So as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 by 2. And then you have it all the way around, so you have 4 sets of these. And inside we can see the cotton and the coil itself. But of course, let's get a closer look, take this apart, and see what it looks like. Alright guys, we have the coil taken apart right now. As we can see here, this is one of the strands of wire. You can see a little bit of residue on there. Hopefully you guys can see that. Just along the inside right there. A little bit of burnt cotton, not too bad though. Moving on to this one, same thing. Nothing too bad, a little bit of blackness right there from burning. But overall not too bad considering we just took it up to 200 watts. Now the big telling sign is the cotton itself. Now I will admit these holes in the cotton are actually from me butchering the coil trying to take it apart. So ignore that, but focus on the actual coloration of the cotton. We can see here there's a little bit of browning on this one, but then a little bit of black on the middle here. So we are getting a little bit of burning. This one's the biggest one though, and we can see right here it's pretty black just from the last hit we took. You can see there, it's still not actually too bad looking at it up close. But we do see that there is definitely some signs of burning. Last 2 pieces right here, that one's not too bad. Let's focus on this one. Again, right around that edging, you can see it just right there. A little bit of blackness, but all in all, it's actually not as bad as what I expected. I honestly expected it to be like pure black just from the hit we took, and it wasn't as bad as what I expected it to be. Now moving on, this is the housing for the coil itself. We can take a quick look inside of it, just to see how it looks. Moving on from there, the next thing I want to do, so that's the coil itself. It's actually not as bad as what I expected it to be, but it still has some signs of burning on it. Anyways, moving on from there, the next thing we want to do is take a look at the coils themselves. Will they fit in the TFE4? And will the TFE4 coils fit in this tank? Let's find out. Alright guys, so I grabbed a TFE4 coil. Here we can see it right here just for proof that this is a TFE4 coil. This is the stainless steel Clapton one. And what we're going to be doing is putting it in the base of the Zpal Coral Tank and seeing if it will fit with it, along with the top of the tank as well. So So it does screw in pretty nicely, not too bad. Caught a little bit at the beginning, so I cut that out. But here it is in the actual Zpal Coral Tank. Here is the top part to the Zpal Coral Tank, so we can see. Next thing we're going to do is know if it will actually fit. And as we screw it in, success. It does fit. Fits nice and snug. Not too bad. We have a little bit of leftover juice in there, but again, there you go. It does fit. Next thing we want to prove is to see if the coral coils will fit in the TFE4 tank. Here's the base of the TFE4 tank, just over here. If I can make a little bit of room for it. Here's the top of it. There they are together. And here is my brand new coral coil for the TFE4 tank. Just take it out of the packaging here. This is the packaging, by the way, for the coral coils. A little bit hard to say, but you get the point. There it is right there. Let's open it up, put it in the TFE4 tank, and see if it will fit. There you have it. It does fit into the actual threading. Let's see if it'll fit onto this base here. So far, it's looking pretty good. A little bit hard to turn because it is a dirty tank. All right, there you have it, guys. The coral coil does fit in the TFE4 tank. We can see here it is a tight fit. As you can see, I'm trying to get this out and it won't come out. What do you say we move on to the tank itself for the coral tank? Check it out a little bit further, then we'll talk about some pros and cons. Alright, so the first thing you'll notice is the Zpal branding on it, as well as the coral on it. Next thing I want to focus on, just really quickly, the bottom pin is pretty shallow in there, so I would not use this on a hybrid style mech mod. I don't recommend using any tanks on a hybrid style mech mod. It's just too dangerous no matter how much that pin sticks out, because the last thing you want to do is put it on and have that pin push into it and end up making it short, which is obviously not what you want in a hybrid mech mod. Now moving on from there, we do have the airflow control valve down here. We can see everything's pretty much gnarled up a little bit, so you have a little bit of gnarling on it, just all around the airflow control. And of course, you have 4 slots for airflow. Now moving that, it is a little bit tighter to spin this, so we can see it's not easy to spin. It has a little bit of pressure on it. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you, but it does require a little bit of pressure. You can move it pretty easily once you get a good grip on it though, and it is pretty easy with all this gnarling around it. Moving on from there, as I mentioned before, this does have airflow in the drip tip, and one thing I will comment on this is that this might be the first airflow style drip tip that is actually being made useful out of this device because of the such high wattages that it can go. But there you go, guys. Very easy to turn. Airflow is super, super simple, and of course, there you have it. You will have to use the proprietary drip tip that's included. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually kind of like this drip tip, and especially for taking it to high wattages, you're going to want that wide bore that this one has. Moving on from there, let's check out the rest of the tank itself. Give it a quick look on the inside. Very, very simple. We've already seen the coil, so really all we're doing now is just opening it up. As you can see here, it does twist off. And this does support 5 mils of juice capacity. Apart from that, the last thing I want to show you is how to fill this device. It is super, super simple. What you're going to want to do, take a hold of it, take the top and just twist it off very, very simply. Remove the top lid. It does come apart. There you have your 2 juice fill holes, which are massive. You can fit most juice spouts on there. And to prove it, here is the big ass bottle of Muffin Man I have. We're going to open that up a little bit. There you go. That's a big ass tip. And next thing we're going to do is fill it up. So we'll line that up and let's watch it in the tank itself. Goes in nice and easy. We're filling it up. So there you go. It's now filled up, as we can see. Now, what do you say we go back up top, talk about the pros and cons a little bit more, and my overall opinion on this device. Alright guys, we're back up top with the Zpal Coral Tank. Now before we get to the pros and cons, I do want to touch on the packaging very quickly before we go any further. So here it is, very simple packaging, guys. You've seen it all before in other sub-ohm tanks. A slot for your tank itself, and a slot for your spare coil. Now this does come with 2 coils, both of them being the 0.2 ohms. The one thing this does not come with though is a spare glass. Is that a deal breaker? For me personally it's not, but for some of you, decide accordingly. Moving on from there, let's talk about the pros and cons, and let's start with the cons since we've already mentioned one, and that's the fact that it does not come with a spare glass tank. Now I don't know if the production models will come with spare glass. This might just be a sample model, which is entirely possible, but for now I'm just going to assume that it does not come with spare glass. Is that a big deal? Again, like I said, I'll let you decide on that one. Moving on from there, the second con is the drip tip. Now for some people it's going to be a con, but for me it's actually not. And the reason why is I actually really like this drip tip and how it performs. It's definitely hitting the spot for me. It's not like I'm reaching for other drip tips, wishing they would work on this device. The drip tip that's included is a great drip tip, but it is a proprietary drip tip and you will not be able to use your own drip tips on this tank. Something to consider. Now moving on from there, let's talk about the airflow on the drip tip. Usually I call this a con, but in this case, it's actually useful. A lot of the times the airflow on the drip tips is more of a gimmick than anything else. On this one, it's actually required to use if you want to cool down the vape at 150 plus watts. If you're going to hit the 150 watt mark, you're going to want to cool it down with that airflow. Is it something I'm going to use? Probably not. But the reason being is I prefer this tank between 115 to 125 watts personally, and I really don't like using the airflow on the drip tip because I feel it actually does cool down the vapor, and I do prefer a hot, dense vape. Alright, so moving on to the pros from there, the biggest pro of course is the fact that this tank can handle super high wattages. Now, did it hit the 200 watt mark like we were hoping? It didn't, but let's be realistic. Most of us are not looking at a tank to do 200 watts. We have drippers for that if we even want to push it that high. The most comfortable spot to hit a tank for me is between 115 to 130 on this device. On other devices, it's pretty much maxing it out to as high as I can get it without getting a burnt or a dry hit. That's typically in the 100 to 110 watt range. This one is definitely a much higher range for the wattage. Now moving on from there, the second pro, of course, is the top fill aspect and how it's done. I prefer this top fill over the TFE4, and I'll tell you why. The TFE4, if you ever have it in your pocket, you'll notice the hinge sometimes comes off, leaks juice everywhere, looks like you pissed your pants. No one wants that. So it is one thing to note that this one does have a much more secure top fill option, and an easier top fill for that matter. You don't have that little rubber ring in the way, and it's a much wider hole, so you can get those larger bottle caps or larger bottle tips inside the hole to fill it up very quickly, and it does have a 5 ml juice capacity. And surprisingly, I cannot confirm this for sure, but it feels like I'm going through juice less often, even though I'm vaping at a higher wattage than I would on my TFE4. This one, for vaping at around 120 watts, seems to be holding its juice a little bit better than TFE4 did. Now, I do have a theory on that, but I'll get to that in a whole different video, and we'll focus on that one separately. But again, this one is holding its juice much better, and it's also not leaking. I left it overnight on its side to test it out, and I got zero leaking at all. Now, one thing I do want to start doing for all of my tank reviews is that exact test. Does it leak? And to prove it, I'm actually going to take out a piece of paper, put it on the paper overnight on its side where the air holes are touching the paper, take it off the next morning, and when I do my review, I will show off the paper to show you whether or not it's clean or if it has any residue on it. And that could be a big telling factor. Apart from that, I think most of the pros and cons are pretty straightforward. Now, it is what it says it is. It's a high-powered tank, and you're going to be able to push the limits on that quite a bit. If you do have a DNA 200, like I said, I probably wouldn't hit it at 200 watts again, personally, but in that 150 range, if you really wanted to, you could. Personally, though, I think I'm going to stick to around 120 to 130 at the max. That seems to be my comfort zone. And moving on from there, I guess one more thing I didn't touch on that I should have is the flavor. The flavor on this tank is phenomenal, guys. This is as close to a dripper as I've ever had. Honestly, I think it beats the Crown tank. I think it beats the TFE4, and it beats most other tanks I've tried to date. So that's saying a lot. Now, I do have a review coming out on the Ceramica by Vapestin, and we'll see how that one compares to this tank. I haven't really had a chance to vape it too much because I've been focusing so much on the Coral. But keep in mind, I will have a full heavyweight showdown of sub-ohm tanks, and all of them are going to be capable of reaching 100 watts and above. And we'll test the limits on all of them to see how high they hit, and to give you an idea of which one is my pick. That being said, in the meantime though, if you are really anxious to get a high-powered tank, is this for you? If you're in the market for one, I think this is a great buy. Right now it's going for $30 online for US, and right around $40 to $50 Canadian, depending on where you find it, if you can find it in a local brick and mortar. And it is very hard to find because it is a newer tank. The $30 mark is a great price tag for this tank, and ultimately we have one more question to answer. The question, of course, is if you have a TFE4, is it worth it to go out and buy this tank? Or should you keep your TFE4 and maybe look at just getting the coils that this tank comes with, because we do know that they are compatible in the TFE4. Now, ultimately, I can't tell you what to do, guys. That's up to you to decide if you want to spend the money on this tank. Is $30 breaking the bank for you guys? Is it a good price? Is it reasonable? What do you guys think? And on top of that, the big question is, have you had any issues with the TFE4? Personally, I have. I've had some leaking issues. I've had the issues where the top cap or the little hinge will come undone and start leaking juice everywhere. Those are pretty big things for me. So for me personally, I'm going to recommend, based on my experience with the TFE4, that this is a buy for me. $30, I would go out and get another one of these. But again, that's just my opinion, guys. What my opinion means to you guys is completely up to you. Do you go out and buy this yourself, or do you want to wait, maybe just get the coils for it and use them in the TFE4? Now the coils are a great aspect of this because you are getting great flavor out of the coils themselves, and like I mentioned before, they are capable of going higher wattage than the average TFE4 coil can. Now of course, like I said, I can't tell you what to do, guys. That's up to you, the viewers, to figure out if this is something that you want to go out and buy, or is this something that you want to maybe hold off on and maybe just try out the coils yourself. One thing to note, let me know in the comments below what you think you're going to do. Alright, so the last question is, if you do not have a TFE4 currently but you're thinking about buying one, should you go out and buy the Coral Tank instead? And based on my personal opinion, I would say yes. I'm definitely using this Coral Tank more than the TFE4, and it's not just because of the coils. The coils themselves are great, but the fact that it has an easier top fill, larger juice holes for the top fill, and it has a screw-on top fill, so it doesn't actually come on and hinge to my pocket like the TFE4 does, that is a big pro. Now the TFE4 of course has a little rubber band that you're supposed to put around the top cap to prevent that from happening, but it's just an added pain in the ass to use every time you're dripping or every time you're filling the tank, and just something I'm personally not a fan of anyways. So ultimately, if you don't have a TFE4, do I recommend the Coral Tank in place of it? I do, and my biggest reason is of course the fact that the Coral Tank does accept the TFE4 coils. So you're getting a different tank, and in my opinion, a better tank with the same selection of coils as you would with the TFE4. Alright guys, so that was my review on the Zpal Coral Tank. I hope this review helped you make an informed decision on whether or not this is something that might be for you, or maybe it's something you're going to pass on and wait for the next thing to come out. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the Zpal Coral Tank, and of course, until next time YouTube, happy vaping.